What is up? Chris Flick here. Chris Flick Podcast, episode 178 with Becca Eberly, Dr. Becca Eberly, which we were just laughing about. So in the new year here, she basically just asked a question here, so I'm going to answer your question and explain what do we got here.
Sounds good.
So she asked how long I was doing a podcast, or do I do them often? I think this year I'm going to try to go back to what we did initially a couple years ago, where try to get some guests on. I'm trying to do like maybe one a week. So you're the first one of the new year.
All
you're
right.
like the first.
2023.
I did like two, I think, last year with some guests that were like just friends. But I figured that I think I know people that are pretty cool and like have basically just introduced people that listen to this to people that I've kind of come to know over the years. Which I think we've come to know each other through fitness at my previous gym where Becca worked out with Frank, who he might be the number one guest on the podcast in terms of frequencies. The only one that's been on like 5 times. But anyway, so Becca is a physical therapist. She's a doctor, doctorate in physical therapy. Where'd you go to college?
Lebanon Valley College.
Lebanon Valley. I also know that Becca, so we're on a horse farm now, and you rode there, right? You were IHSA, right?
I did, yeah. I rode for IHSA. I've ridden since I was little, so. And in college, horses are expensive, so affording that was.
And then growing up, did you have horses?
Yes, I did. I had one in high school.
What do you think the connection is with humans? Like, why is the horse so special? Because I see there's like this.
Yeah, there's a connection. There is. And it's just, I think it's building that bond with just something else that you can't communicate with and figuring out how to tap into the listening and paying attention to the subtle body language that horses have that we're not used to in our busy world.
Because there's been a few families that I've worked with that have used horse in like that physical therapy style. Do you have any experience with that?
As a professional PT, no, but in high school I used to volunteer at a therapeutic riding center, and it was crazy to see the impact that the horses had on clients' balance or just their communication skills or their eye contact. I've had a lot of clients that we worked with that would like make eye contact for the first time because they were like engrossed with it and just that sort of thing. It's really cool.
Yeah, I've seen it. Like, it seems that if you tell like a large animal to like do something, if they don't, then you have to figure out a way to do it. And I don't remember what the number was, but it was like the horses are like, whatever, 7 times more sensitive than like a dog would be or something. It was something crazy. Yeah. Like 10 times more than a human. So they're super in tune with like whatever feedback you give them, which is pretty cool.
It is, and they're in tune. I don't know if I ever told you that. They're very in tune with your body language and stuff. So I have my own horse. I've had her 5 years, and she's a little bit wild on a normal case, but I rode her when I was pregnant both times, and she was like the most docile.
Do you think she sensed something?
Oh, I'm sure she did. Yeah, she was like so well behaved and like took care of me. Like
that is very interesting.
Yeah.
Why? I do believe that is a thing. So I'm not going to say that, but then.
Yeah. Why? It's a great question.
Yeah, and also with there's definitely, I mean, they just feed off your energy, I guess, at the end of it, right? When we had a dog, we had a friend over that was pregnant, our one little dog, Layla, she's Jack Russell, but she's tiny. She was like all over this lady. Yeah. And like sitting on her lap, like growling at the other dog, but she never did that ever.
She like wouldn't let anyone near.
So I can only imagine the horse is probably the same.
Yeah.
So with college then, the IHSA thing was cool. I went to a few, like, Marisa was involved with like a committee that got us invited to these meetings in Orlando. Yeah. So we did this like 3 times, so you get to like meet some of the people. And it's a cool thing in the sense that the whole goal, the mission was to like, not to like create these like champion riders, but to offer up horses to as many people as possible. Right. That have maybe never gotten that opportunity before. Right. And like on the Lehigh team, for example, there's like a girl from China, you know, I swear Marisa always has girls from other countries that come and they're like, I just want to come to America.
Ride a horse.
I mean, one girl was like, I took her English wasn't great. She needed to ride back to Lehigh, and I was like the only option to get her back there. So she was like, just wanted to come to America, ride horses, and shoot a gun, she said.
That's great.
I was like, alrighty. So that was the gist of our talk. Riding horses while pregnant. Yeah. Why?
Because I always done it. It was something that it was my fitness, it was my outlet, it was my stress reliever. I'd been doing it for many years, and I've had my horse. I was very in tune with her, so I knew. Yeah. And I could tell, and you know, my husband and I talked about it, and I told him that if I didn't feel safe, that I wouldn't be doing it. And she took care of me. She knew And just to say, mostly my sanity. It's my stress relief.
Yeah, I saw, we were in New Jersey, and before we had a child, before Marisa was pregnant, there was a lady riding pregnant, and I was just like, I didn't understand why.
Yeah.
Still definitely don't, but like Marisa rode when she was pregnant, it just kind of is what it is. I don't know, it's something you've done forever. Well,
right,
forever,
it becomes like a part of you.
Yeah.
It's, you know.
And I remember reading, there's this joke with this one lady who, like Frank, and I met at an LA Fitness like over 10 years ago as a trainer. So I trained this one lady there, and she was pregnant, and I was reading this book, Spark, that's really good. And it talked about jostling the womb. So if the womb is moving around and there's a baby in there, it gets like the sensory things, like them picking something up or whatever. It's like, So then I saw this past year, I was like, hey, her daughter was in this play at DeSales, and I was like, oh, that's so awesome. She's like 8 now. And I was like, anyway, she was like, it's because I was jostling the womb. And I was like, that's right. So then I was like, you know what, maybe there is something to it. Maybe you can ride a horse and it'll be okay. The stimulation that the baby gets in there is actually beneficial to them when they come out. They're a little bit more
they're getting
advanced.
the vestibular input in.
Which is cool. Anyway, so let's get into kind of where you are now instead of talking about horses here. So now you worked at the restoration space, right?
Yep.
It's in Bethlehem.
Southside Bethlehem.
Southside of Bethlehem. And there, I mean, there's 3 of you there working.
There's quite a few of us there. There's 3 orthopedic PTs, myself, then there's 2 Megans, and then we have there's more therapists that do pelvic floor therapy. So there's 1, 2, 3. There's 4 therapists there that do pelvic floor therapy of all kinds, prenatal, postnatal, post-abdominal surgeries. One of the therapists also does pediatric pelvic floor, so...
Pediatric?
So like nighttime bedwetting, or if they don't have bowel and bladder control.
Wow, how old are those kids typically?
Typically 5 or older is when it starts to be considered like a medical issue. Like something by the time they're going to kindergarten or trying to have sleepover, stuff like that, where it becomes like impeding the lifestyle.
Yeah, and then your work there. Who are you primarily working with?
So I primarily see. I have like a 50-50 caseload of adult and pediatric orthopedic cases. So athletes from as young as 6 to I've had a couple students from Lehigh or Lafayette on various sports teams.
What are those 6-year-old? I mean, what is going on with some of the younger things? Is it like stuff that happened being physically active, or is it just something, or both, that they were born with kind of thing?
Most of them that I've seen are a combination of both. Some of it's just traumatic, physically active stuff, skiing accidents, that sort of thing. Some of them are overuse injuries from various sports that they've been playing. And some are stuff that they've been born with, but most of the time if it's something they're born with, it's a matter of like lower tone or hyperflexibility, that they're like so mobile but they don't have the strength and stability to like stabilize their joints, and then they tend to get into gymnastics or dance that it like overuses the flexibility that they have, and then they end up with injuries that way instead of stabilizing to move.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think the first part is the tone thing. The first time I heard of it was with horses.
Yeah.
A family was like, our son has low tone.
Right.
We did this therapy and stuff, and tone is just the ability of a muscle to fire.
Right. Right. So if you think about if you think about a baby, like a newborn baby, they're like, most of them are considered low tone because they're floppy. They just kind of hang there.
Yeah.
But as they start to develop and move, they're going to start building that muscle strength and then the core stability. They should be able to hold themselves upright. With some of the kids that have the lower tone, they kind of flop into the chair. They need support. They can't, sit still upright on a bench kind of without support.
Got it. Then the second part too, you were thinking that those kids that have, that are hypermobile, or just really flexible, they'll almost, it's like a self-select or natural selection or something, and head into sports or activities that aren't going to be beneficial for their long-term health, I guess. Physical health anyway.
Yeah, I've actually, since being at the restoration space, I've seen quite a few adults and kids that have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
So they're just super mobile, but they don't have any awareness of kind of where their joints are in space, and then they tend to not develop the strength to stabilize those joints. So then, right, if you think about gymnastics, if they're hypomobile, they're going to be going into split after split after split, just kind of continuing to mobilize the joints. And if they're not doing some type of strength and conditioning or PT alongside of that, then you
just stability,
bendy joints.
Right? Anything, right?
Yeah.
With the, it was like strength training and stability training, kind of vice versa too, right?
Right.
So, if you have two, I guess it's just you want those baskets to be somewhat even and not hypermobile with no stability would mean that just the chance of injury range is just
right. They're
gonna
gonna dislocate their joints and then.
Well, what do you do about that? So that's a question that has come up. The kid that does a push-up, right, and their elbow could come all the way in and
they dislocate.
Well, no, they dislocate, but it's not like a painful thing, right?
Right.
It's just,
It's more of a sublux.
Yeah. When you have kids that experience that, or that locked knee, like when they stand up, their knee kind of inverts a little bit, and they could, I guess it's not a lock, I don't know what it is, but.
So they're hyperextending the knee to gain stability that they don't have.
But that's like their normal, their normal stance.
Right, it's their normal. So, with kids, they're adaptable, they can kind of overcome it. What I've tend to see lately is the person in their 20s or 30s that they stood like that for their whole life, and now they're having problems because they have a desk job and they sit all day and then they try to work out afterwards. So that's just going to be a lot of figuring out where their muscle weaknesses are and why they're locking out. Is it a habit? Is it muscle weakness? Do we need to reteach them where their joint position is and like what normal is and not, going into that hyperextension? Because if you kind of always go there, you're just going to stretch out the ligaments and tendons and then it's going to be harder to stabilize.
So, I personally cannot do that. So when I lock my elbow, like I'm just in this position, right?
Right.
So if you have a kid that when they lock their elbow does go into that position, do you recommend to like not go full and lock that joint? So you don't want to put like load on that
right.
hyperextended joint, I guess?
Yeah. Right. So if it's hyperextended, because then you're just getting the stability from the joint position as opposed to the stability from the muscles surrounding the joint.
All right. Note taken.
Yeah, don't do that.
No, because it's not even like a thing. It's like a kid doesn't even have a clue.
Yes.
And I'm sure the parents don't even have a clue.
Right.
That when they're doing the push-up, the elbow comes in, whatever. Like it's not a big deal. That's just how their elbows are. But I guess over time this could become something.
Right. And it's just you want the kids to develop good movement patterns to start with instead of, if you reinforce that push-up like that over and over again, it's just going to become their habit and their push-up.
And I think too, if we just take that one example and look at the broader approach of things, not building that just the proper mechanics of all kinds of movement, right? And I think you probably end up seeing some of that overuse injury stuff with not having the proper mechanics on one end and then also not having the, we talked about that kid that could do the splits. They only have the mobility side of things.
Right.
They don't have that whole.
Right, if they don't have the stability with it.
So when you're getting some things like overuse injuries, well, I guess first off too, you also mentioned you do like foot and ankle, right? So is that like with a lot of runners and all that? What kind of injuries do you see? That running population, I feel like, tends to have some overuse stuff, right?
Yeah, they do. They tend to have some overuse injuries. Foot and ankle, and I think with our culture and our society, how we've gone to wearing heavy footwear and stuff, it kind of, people forget that their feet are supposed to move, their feet are supposed to be mobile and have strength and stability. So with the runners, they tend to put themselves in these big clunky shoes and then they need to get mobility and stability elsewhere and they're not getting it from foot and ankles. So it kind of depends with what they come into. We see a lot of IT band issues or chronic knee pain stuff. So then we have to tease out, do they have no mobility in the foot that we have to help them improve their foot strength and their foot mobility, or is it a hip stability issue?
Not to go too off topic here, but did you read that Born to Run book?
I did.
This guy, I just heard an interview with him. He has a book about animals too, with a donkey and his family in Pennsylvania, and this weird connection. They I didn't read it yet, but it's one of his. This interview was 2 years ago, so it's his latest book. But he lived in Pennsylvania in Amish country. Yeah, but anyways, it was an interesting thing. But that book, for example, Born to Run, I think changed a lot.
It did.
Yeah, but you know what? I always feel like it's people will listen when they want to listen, and it's usually when there's an injury or something or some pain going on. So I recently anyway, I'm just waking up in the mornings and my ankles have kind of an issue. I'll just have this pain in my heel.
Yeah.
That's not comfortable. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what it is. And then I hear people talking about you have to start looking in everything, right? It's like, how are you sleeping? Are you hydrated? Are you wearing the right footwear? Like, just because you have that pain in the heel doesn't necessarily mean
that you have plantar fasciitis.
Right.
It's normal, right.
Well, I ended up getting some sort of manual, therapy, kind of massage, kind of stretch stuff. And the guy's just like, I don't think that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
So it's just got me thinking, like, I have stiff ankles, whatever it may be, right? But the whole point would be to, like, take the holistic approach to things where, when you are meeting with somebody, I feel like they would probably want, the Band-Aid solution just to, like, feel better now. But really what they need to look at is more of, maybe they're not eating, maybe the diet that they're eating is affecting how they're feeling, or the footwear. Like, is that a struggle that you have, or is that something that you're able to get people to kind of understand and appreciate? Does it take time, I imagine?
It kind of depends. It's one of those things I have to tease out when I first meet someone, how into the holistic approach are they, and what their buy-in is to start, and kind of where we can, what changes can we make right away that they're willing to accept, and like what changes we can make like long term. But even just starting with, like you said, hydration, like I'll get chronic back pain patients that, they're in their 40s, they've had back pain their whole life, and they drink maybe 8 ounces of water a day. Like that's, we can do all the therapy and you can do all the, strengthening measures you want, but if you're chronically dehydrated, like your body is not gonna move and feel as well as it could.
And then I was gonna go with the sleep part, because you mentioned to me, how old is your youngest?
She's 7 months.
So she's 7 months, and you have a 3?
He'll be 3 in February, yep.
Almost 3-year-old.
Yeah.
So there's only so much you could do, right? So I'm sure you deal with the parents, the people that are overworked or whatever, which seems to be a lot of just about everybody always seems tired.
Yes.
What about the sleep side of things? People are probably dehydrated. I think we just kind of established that. Now the sleep side of things. Do you think anybody gets adequate sleep?
I would probably say very few. Very few.
So that seems to be a tough one to kind of convince people to get on board with, right?
Right. Why? That's probably the harder one. I think people don't value sleep like they don't see it as a recovery tool and a training tool.
Yeah, that's true.
And
that's
I think changing that mindset of like how much your body, heals and regenerates and fixes itself during sleep is kind of what we need people to like tap into.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to tell people to sleep for 8 hours a day, but when you have dishes to do, kids that wake up at night, and
Yeah, there's really no sleeping through the night. I mean, I know, like, our dogs, they'll wake me up. I mean, our daughter's at a point where she's sleeping well, but having you said 7 weeks?
7 months.
7 months, fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure, some kids will, is it a boy or girl?
The youngest?
Yeah.
Girl.
Does she sleep through the night or no?
She does. She was a little bit, and I think she's teething now because we don't have any teeth yet, so now we're teething through the night.
So waking you up.
Right.
So how do you handle that side of things then in your own personal life? Like, you have to sleep more. Do you try to sneak naps in, or are you just like, I'm biting the bullet, I'm not going to sleep for 2 years, and that's going to be okay?
Well, and it's kind of that balance of, with having younger kids, my training aspect has definitely decreased, so my training intensity has gone down.
Yeah.
Thinking about, and I want to say I read it in a book, or maybe it was like a podcast. They talked about your life stresses as like a pie, and thinking about where you're designating that pie to. And right now, where I'm at in life, I can't stress my body too much with training because I'm not sleeping and I'm still breastfeeding her. So like all that stuff is putting stress and demand on my body that, I can't take up with high intensity running or, high lifting stuff.
The pie's is a good thought. And you're not going to get sleep, so you shouldn't be killing yourself in the gym.
Right, because I'm not going to be able to like recover appropriately.
Or you'll end up seeing people like you, which I feel like is where some of your clients now are. They're not getting that sleep for whatever reason it may be, but they're still trying to hammer away. Or I guess the opposite is also true, where you're not getting the physically active person either, right? The sedentary individual is coming in as well.
Right,
Or do they not even seek out?
Yeah, so then you have the sedentary individual that sits at their desk for 8 hours a day, and then, their back hurts, or they try to play with their kids later that night, and their kids are excited and ready to run around, and they've been sitting for 8 hours and not moving, so then everything's stiff, tight, and they don't have the strength to stabilize. So it's finding that balance, because we're not meant to sit we're not meant to be in one position for long periods of time, but that's kind of our culture at the moment, whether it's at work or kids at school.
Do you sit, is your job at work or are you up? Like when you're working with people, you're on your feet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's nice.
We're sitting, like on the floor. Like I normally sit on the floor.
Right. That's another thing too. Like if you sit on the floor, it's not a comfy chair, so like you have to sit in a way that's proper. I feel like.
Right. Or you're squatting
really
or moving or right.
That's that was at I think Deskbound. Like we were talking about that Kelly Starrett's got this podcast. He wrote the Supple Leopard book, but he has a book called Deskbound where he and his wife are trying to get kids.
Yeah.
In California, this is a couple years now, so I don't know how far and if they were able to expand, but they're trying to get people out of their seats.
Right.
But they talked about that. It's like sit on the floor, sit in different postures, like in the morning. So I like if I'm reading in the morning, I just sit on the ground with like my leg plopped out and like try to stretch something while reading
I
at
mean,
the same
if you
time.
ask someone who's
if I sit on the couch and read, I'm like I wake my back feels like that too. Yeah, I'm out. I'll fall asleep in 3 minutes and I'll wake up.
I'm gonna fall asleep.
And I'll wake up with my back hurting.
Well, but it's funny to me, like if you ask someone who's maybe like over 40, the last time they sat on the ground, most of them can't remember.
Yeah, till you have a kid and then you're like on the ground all the time.
Right, yeah.
Which is good. Yeah, I mean, I like that part of it too, which isn't really physical therapy, but when you have a kid, they kind of bring back the playful, the play side of things. So I feel that as an adult, as a parent, it would be nice, if we could get, make that more of a priority. Like if you don't want to do stuff for yourself, it's like, think about, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities and a lot of fun and a lot of like time with your kid.
Right, to play with them and to be active. Right, yeah.
So,
and I will say, I always think about your obstacle courses here because when I have some of my kids, especially if we're working on like balance or like body awareness, we'll do like obstacle courses, and I can't tell you how many times I have parents who are like, that looks like fun. Why can't my workouts be like that? I'm like, they could. They could. Like, you could do it.
I don't have parents do it, but that's they say the same thing.
You could.
Like, oh, when are we doing that? I'm like, I don't know. I guess it doesn't. I guess the answer should just be like this week.
There you
go.
Just
set one up. Yeah.
Adult.
We still have nice. We still have nice weather.
Adult obstacle course.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you try to walk a beam. Those guys, that functional movement screen guys. Like Greg Cook they just do beam all the time, and like, he in his mind, it's like your body automatically is going to give you some feedback. Mm-hmm. Your ankles can't be stiff. So like if they use it as a tool to kind of loosen up too, and I guess get some of those. It's got to be the stabilizer, I guess.
Right.
Or just waking some things up. Or like
and even the foot awareness, right? Like getting that foot awareness and that like input from the ground.
Did you ever stand up paddleboard?
Yes.
So I've noticed like I did it one time. We went out this past year to do a yoga class, and then my feet and my ankles felt incredibly they just felt loose. Like they weren't locked up, and they weren't stiff, they weren't tight. Like I could do a full squat and get really low. So I don't think like the ankle mobility is an issue, but it's like they're always like locked on.
Right.
And I don't really know what they're trying to protect, which is something I do want to talk about. Anyway, you get on the stand-up paddleboard and you got this balance thing, and I think it's the same effect with the balance beam, like without shoes on or, trying to do certain things, ducking under things while balancing, I found to be cool. Last week we were telling kids to do that thing, like, I mean, just to make the beam more harder, and then you realize that like they're falling off. But anyway, so like just doing some things with bare feet, they require balance. I've learned just personally that like it just kind of frees things up to move more smoothly. Is that a word? Smoothly? Smoother is probably better.
There's so many nerve endings in your feet too that sends like all those signals, whether it's the temperature of the ground, how the balance beam feels, is it rough, soft, like just waking that up is gonna.
Now what about the barefoot outside stuff? People are like, you feel the energy of the earth.
I haven't really looked into like the grounding. A lot of people call it like grounding.
I don't know what that means really, but it's a thing for sure.
It is. They talk about the ions of the earth and getting the energy. Yeah. I mean, I haven't really looked scientifically if it, is.
It's probably not going to show up scientifically.
Right. But in terms of being barefoot in the grass and like with the temperatures, you're getting so much input into the foot and the ground that like from that aspect, from like a what you're feeling sensation aspect, being able to like.
It is. I can vouch for that.
It's going to be.
Great.
Yeah.
When these kids are like 25 now, but when they were in high school, I would use the football field and I would go barefoot in between our double session practices, and they always thought I was a weirdo. But there's something about the grass in your feet. And,
it's great.
Yeah, and it's like limiting you where you can't work hard. You work at like 70% of what you're capable of because you don't have the shoe on.
Right.
So you can't do sprints really.
Right.
So you just kind of ease into it and you run at a pretty good pace. And I think that's a benefit too, where you feel good afterwards. You're not feeling exhausted after the fact, but you just did a bunch of good work. Your feet and ankles feel great, and I'm sure you feel good later that day, and you feel good tomorrow because you can't kill yourself.
You're not overtraining, right?
Yeah. And then going back to that pain site thing, which people are like, what was my example? My ankles so my ankles, I think there'd be some stiffness there, and it could be protecting something else. So you have like this approach. We talked about stability and mobility. The ankle is meant to mobilize.
Right.
I think the knees to stabilize, right? But if the knee's messed up and can't do the work that it's supposed to do in the stability department, then your hip or ankle or something is going to have to...
You're going to get it from somewhere else.
And I think, you could verify this or not, but if you have like a stiff joint or a stiff ankle or a tight muscle, it's not necessarily that site being the problem, but it's trying to protect something else.
Right. So your body is meant to move. Like, it's going to do whatever you ask it to do. So especially, I see it a lot with like runners or like your high school athletes, like people that like want to move. Like your body's going to move in whatever way you ask it to, whether it has the mobility or stability or not. So, if you're having knee pain, the problem might not be from your knee. It might be an overuse injury at your knee because you don't have the mobility in your ankle. That like if your ankle is not moving correctly, it's going to put more strain on your knee, so then your knee hurts. So it's just teasing out kind of where the problem is and whether it's actually coming from the knee itself or whether it's, like an ankle mobility issue that we have to correct to take, the overworked knee to let it do its normal job.
And then it's like up or below, right? Like
right. Right. It could be the hip, obviously. Yeah.
When you get something like the IT band, I always feel like number one, too, people always feel like they're tight. Do people come in and say, hey, like they can put their palms flat on the ground, but they're like, oh, I'm so tight. Do you experience that? Where people, every single person thinks they're tight? Yes. Why? Do you have any thoughts on this?
A lot of times I find that the muscle is so stretched out that it's not active. So then it's stretched out so it feels tight as opposed to like worked. And I think it's a fine nuance of like what are they feeling?
Yeah.
Like
that makes sense.
In their language, the muscles are either like tight or loose, versus like if your hamstrings are so stretched out that you can reach your hands to the floor, like they're not tight.
Yeah,
you just might not be using them correctly, so they feel stretched out.
That was one thing that I don't know. I just like used to like entertain some conversation like, oh yeah, but now I'm just like, you know what? You could do like a full squat. You could do this. Like you're not tight. Like a tight person is like barely being able to like get their hands past their knees, doing something. There's something else going on. I don't know what it is at the moment, but muscle tightness.
And
like,
I
don't think stretching will be the solution.
Correct. And I found sometimes in those situations, activating the muscles actually improves the feeling of tightness.
Like if your hamstring, you have like a RDL.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Like turning them on, then they're, instead of feeling like lengthened and like stretched out where they feel so tight, they're like contractile and like working.
Yeah. Contractile.
There you go.
All right.
Good words.
Words I don't use really often. So let's say you got the, what else? People are like, whatever, hamstrings tight, backs are tight.
The other one I hear a lot is like their upper traps feel tight.
Yeah.
Like they get the tightness.
I don't know if it's, you know what, everybody sees, like we'll go in and you'll get this treatment done or something, and that's always the answer. Like everybody is incredibly tight in their upper back, upper neck, trap area, whatever. Is that just a product, in your opinion, of like driving, sitting, keyboarding?
all the positions.
All that?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, well, definitely some of that. Sometimes too, like we talked about with the hamstrings, I find that they're, if they're tight, they're gonna feel tight. If you kind of stretch your neck out, you'll feel tightness. But sometimes it's a matter of not activating the upper traps because we're always, how often do you reach overhead to do any sort of weighted lifting activity? You probably do more than majority.
That's actually all I do.
I
don't do anything this way.
You're like, I don't do anything this way.
Because my shoulder hurts this way, so instead of fixing
that, you just do overhead.
I'm on like 12 years of avoiding the bench press. Would you recommend that as a solution?
No.
Okay.
Avoidance is not a solution.
There was this lady that was like, that comes and works out, and she's been working out with me for a while, and we have a pretty good, relationship in that regard that we talk about anything. And she's like, why don't you just see a doctor? And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. But, so we're still avoiding. Maybe this year. Maybe this year.
Maybe 2023.
I got to check my health insurance and we'll see if I can get something covered. But so what do we got? We're talking about tightness. Overuse stuff. Is I want to get into that a little bit because there was a local baseball organization. A kid has something that I didn't know existed. It's actually the second time I heard it in the last year. One was a lacrosse player. They might have called it Little Leaguer's elbow.
Okay.
Not a lot of lacrosse. Goes to like a weekend camp that involved 4 hours Saturday, 4 hours Sunday. And elbows destroyed then. Like the kid couldn't even lift weights all summer. And he's in 7th grade maybe, at a good age to start learning everything. And he missed out on this window of opportunity where maybe some puberty is going to come soon where you can like, you know, there's that, in my opinion, and I worked with it. I've seen it, so I'm just going to go with it because it's fact. All right.
Sounds
so,
good.
Kids are in these high school years, right? If these boys miss out on these windows to train, they're not going to get that strength back when they're 25.
No.
It's like you have this ability where this testosterone and all this stuff is happening that you need to be healthy and you need to be in a position to get as strong as physically possible because, like, not at the expense of the mobility and the stability, like, not at the expense of that, but because when you're 25, you're going to be stronger at 40, and then, but if you miss that,
is it 30 that it starts to decrease?
Yeah, and I don't remember the number exactly, but it was like, this book was written in the 60s, and it was, you have a good chunk of your percentage of strength at age 60 compared to like 30. So the stronger you are at 30, the stronger you're going to be at 60. Is basically what this book was getting at. It was like the physiology of strength or something. But anyhow, you know, doing too much of something, you get these kids missing sport time, obviously, missing opportunities to train and take care of themselves. Little leaguer shoulders, another thing, right? And some of these things never even existed. They didn't exist, actually.
They didn't. So a lot of it, too, is the development of kids, like, of your one-athlete sports.
Yeah.
Like, kids these days, they pick a sport at 6 or 7,
Kids
and
these days.
that's all they do.
Yeah. And they, with something like, this was the problem that happened in this local, like, Little League was, the mom of the kid then is wondering, there's no stretching, there's no this or that. And then my initial thought was like, it's an overuse problem. Like, you could stretch after practice, but who's running those stretching programs? It's going to be the coaches, right? It's going to be the volunteers. It's going to be the dads that are involved. So, like, are you really going to get a good stretch program out of that? Probably not. I think the problem lies with too much. You know, there's a couple kids that I had that played on 2 or 3 baseball teams, and, well, I pitched in one game, and then the next day I was catching, or the next day I was playing outfield. And those are long throws. They're a lot of throws. It's repetitive stuff. So they could do their pitch counts in one league, and that's fine. But that doesn't prevent the kid from going and playing in a different league. So when you have, I mean, obviously an overuse injury, rest. Like, what if you have a kid that comes in with something like that? I don't know if I think you'd said that it's not like a big thing of what you're doing, right? With
I don't see a ton of little leaguers elbow, but in terms of like overuse injuries, yes, there's gonna be a rest period, but then it's also the gradual return to activity as quickly as possible because you don't want them to be immobile for too long. It's just a matter of figuring out what they can do without aggravating the overuse injury and figuring out why. Is it the throwing mechanics that need to be corrected, by a pitching or throwing coach? Is it strength that, we need to do a strength and conditioning program to stabilize everything? Is it a stretching program? Is it, kind of where's the breakdown happening? Especially with throwing, I see a lot of limitations in like spinal rotation because your throw, you're getting the rotation through the spine to kind of get that wind up and throw. And then sometimes with the kids or even like college stage pitchers and catchers, they're throwing from their shoulder only as opposed to like
I think
that
that's a genesis of this, I think.
Right.
But that's a good point. That's a joint by joint thing. Your spine, thoracic spine, is that the spot that should be sliding or no?
Right. So you're going to rotate through the thoracic spine as well as a little bit of the lumbar spine, but that should also be stable.
But if that's not doing it, then your arm is going through this range of motion that it's not supposed to be doing. Right. So it's doing work that it shouldn't be doing, all because you don't have the mobility in the neighboring joint.
Yes.
When you have that overuse, if it's a throwing injury, if you have an itis of some sort, like the inflammation, I mean, it's itis, right? So there's swelling, inflammation, whatever. That has to go down.
It does.
And if, basically I want to get at stretching muscles and stuff like that, is that even is that a 50-50 solution? Is that not even a solution if there's some sort of inflammation?
Right. So it's a matter of teasing out why the inflammation and the overuse injury occurred initially and like solving it at the root cause. You know, if it occurred because they threw too much one day and you just overused the muscles, well, stretching to maintain your mobility so that you still have the range of motion when you get back to throwing is great. But we also want to strengthen and stabilize and work on kind of the correct muscle balances to prevent that from happening again. But if the overuse injury happened because, you know, you have limited shoulder mobility, then we would correct that before. Like, we would want to get that fixed before you really go back to kind of throwing.
Makes sense. I only asked because this baseball situation was, like, USA Baseball has their, it's like ADM developmental model, I don't know, athlete development model maybe. So it's like 50-something pages, and it goes through the different age groups, you know, like young kids should be doing this, but the stretching part of it became part of their, you know, protocol to take care of a good arm. And it's the only reason I ask because in my mind, I'm like, if you have some inflammation, if you have some pain at a joint or a tendon, or like a tendon, say, it's like, what are you stretching? Like, I don't know.
Right. You might, and you might, in that case, you might not want to pull too much on the tendon if it's already aggravated and you have the mobility.
So if you have a mechanic issue too, then like I coached quarterbacks for like 10 years, and there was always this thing with football where the NFL, oh, this guy's throwing motion sucks, whatever, and they would always try to fix that. College guy, bad throwing motion, he's going to the pros. They would hire a coach, whatever. Those guys always seem to revert to the old motion because they did it 10,000, 100,000 times. I don't want to like discredit, you know, throwing coaches and all that, but I just always thought, in my experience, that when the stress is there, you kind of revert back to what you did thousands of times, and not what you practice in like that controlled environment of a session with a throwing coach. You know?
Right, and you know, not having a ton of experience with throwing coaches and kind of throwing, you know, at that high level with a lot of the runners that I'll see. I won't touch their gait unless unless we've tried everything else, and like that is the problem, because teaching someone how to walk a different way or run a different way is going to be way harder than stabilizing and building up the strength. If you watch some of like the high level like marathon runners, like their gait isn't going to be picture perfect, but they don't have injuries and they don't have a problem because their body's adapted and their tendons have strengthened and stabilized and like they're good to go. So I would almost go with the same thing with the pitchers as well. If they're, you know, if it's a issue that they have an injury or they're not, you know, producing the speed or the force that like they're looking for to go pro, then obviously there's tweaks that probably could be done. But in terms of like just fixing it to fix it, it's gonna be a long term.
Running example would be like trying to fix some gait on somebody that, you know, a lot of parents are like, hey, my kid has heavy feet.
Right.
You know, so you talked about the foot, literally. I mean, it kind of starts in the ground up. So if you just spend your time talking about like arm action and all that, you're not, you know, building the stability, the mobility or whatever would be required to get that kid moving properly. Kind of just almost wasting your time there.
Right, and sometimes too you can cause more injuries by trying to correct the gait as well, because now they're going to be running different than their body's adapted to run.
It's not prepared for those demands.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean,
a lot of tricky stuff out there.
It is. I mean, if you have if I have a running client that comes with like repeated stress fractures, like issues like that, and they have like that heavy foot strike, then, you know, because they have those chronic injuries, it might be something at that point that like we do have to address the gait so they stop getting stress fractures and like kind of, you know, adapt it that way.
The stress fracture thing is interesting as well. I didn't really realize how prevalent that was with, well, it seemed to be more, hits the female community, I think, a little bit harder than the male. But yeah, people just train through that stuff. What happens then if you have a stress fracture? Obviously it just gets worse. But
if you train through it?
Yeah, I mean, your body will compensate and maybe your gait will get messed up. Like, do you get some of that then too, where like a muscle injury or?
Right, and then it's their gait pattern going forward as opposed to reverting back to how they were before, stress injuries are an interesting one, especially like in adolescent, even college age females, because a lot of times, it could be a mechanical thing, but it can also be a like vitamin deficiency or hormonal imbalances.
Around whatever it's been, college for me, that's when I first learned of that triad with the female athletes, where it's like, I think I just wanted to circle back to that holistic thing that we talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you're not getting, your body's you're getting this injury because of other reasons that aren't necessarily involved with what you're doing. It's only one part of like this.
Right.
And I don't even know if that's been updated at this point, but.
I know they've updated it to include males because they've seen some of like the overuse injuries in males as well. So it's not, I know it's not considered like the female triad specifically anymore, but.
Inclusive.
It's all inclusive, yep.
And then when you, so you see all this stuff going on, right? We've got sedentary people, and then we got the others. It's like there's no middle ground. There's the sedentary kid, and I think there's the kid that is too specialized.
Right.
There's no generalization with a lot of kids in their development. I think that's a problem. So we try to bring that to like kind of what I'm doing here. Try to keep that in mind being a parent. Like you have children now too. Is there any kind of, I remember hearing once, it's like, hey, if your kid could walk, they're walking.
Mm-hmm.
Don't carry them.
Right.
Don't stroll them around. Obviously, there's circumstances that we're gonna go in the stroller because we're gonna.
we gotta get somewhere.
We gotta be quick here. Yeah, but like, that was a thought that I never really thought about. It's like if your kid could do it, let him do it. Get them moving early. Get them all that type of stuff. So, as a parent now, is there any of these things that you're like thinking about that you're like, what the hell am I thinking about these long-term things when my kid is only 7 months old? Like, what do you think? Like, hey, I messed something up.
I screwed up on the first one. This is my second go-around. The one thing that I actually am always interested in too is like the amount of risks that they're willing to take. Not so much the 7-month-old, but my almost 3-year-old, like letting him, jump off the couch or letting him like explore, like standing on the rocks when we go for hikes and walks, like, letting him figure out where his boundaries are and where he feels safe and what he feels like he can do.
Yeah. That's what I think a lot about that.
Yeah. Because if not, then they're gonna get
And because I think about that and I try to read about that and understand that, just to keep it in mind when I see so many parents like limit their children at very young ages without allowing them to figure things out on their own, even if it does stress you out,
Right.
Like as a parent, you're like,
you're like, I don't want to end up in the urgent care again.
Somebody told me this years ago, but she was just like, wait till your kids start walking down the stairs.
Yeah, right.
And now I see Emmy coming down in the mornings, or she's at an age now where she's good, but like, I'm like, alrighty, let's cross her fingers and hope that whatever, she's carrying 3 things and like making her way down. Yeah, it is what it is. So that's important too, I think. I'm glad you brought that up. Like, you got to let them find their boundaries and try not to squash their physical.
Yeah.
Physical literacy is the thing that comes up a lot with, these kids need to be well versed in a lot of things. In order for them to, stay injury free and all that when they get older. So, you got to let them explore, let them figure out what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with.
When I feel like they have to see you, not necessarily that you have to be in top physical shape, but they have to see you being active and moving around, or at least allowing them to explore that. If you always tell them no, or you can't do that, then that's just going to perpetuate that in the long term.
Yeah, you gotta let it ride, I guess, sometimes. And then what about with your kids then? Any idea with like, so one is kind of at an age, is there any activities like, you finding
like
things like interest?
Like
no, not really. Well, yes and no, but like anything that you guys do as parents, or you're starting to see like your child is like finding an interest in?
Yes and no. He has sort of developed, he really likes to play baseball. And he's actually somewhat good at it. So fostering that, just trying to get him outside more. It's interesting to see what he shies away from, because his balance and stability probably isn't the greatest, so he shies away from trying to ride his bike, like trying to ride his balance bike and like scooters and stuff. Just letting him, we do swim classes with him, so just letting him try to like figure out how to move.
I think it's important not to make it a thing either.
Right.
Like if they don't want to try the bike, like don't force it, the bike, because then it's like, no way.
Oh yeah, that is a big no way. I mean, he'll sometimes when I would go for runs, he would try to come run with me, but it normally ends up a half-mile run and then me carrying him back. So yeah, he enjoys it, and I get a little weighted walk in afterwards.
Yeah. What and then any like as a parent, like do you see Are you doing things now that you thought you would never do? Like, or did anything change? Was there like some sort of mindset shift at all with like, I'll give an example.
Yeah.
Marisa was like, hey, I think you might be interested in this thing about Princess Harry and his wife Meghan Markle on Netflix. It's like 5 episodes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, probably not, but I'll give it a shot. The reason, it actually is somewhat interesting because he was just, he just thought differently and he didn't want to kind of fit into this like royal box. His whole life was just like on, since the moment he was born. Then like they start showing this and like his mom, Princess Diana, died like when he was like 4. And I'm like, I never even thought of that.
Right.
Like now as a
So
parent, you're like,
yeah,
you're starting to think not only has he got the royal thing going on, but he didn't have his mother.
Right.
You know, and he's like, I don't know if I blocked these memories out because it was a traumatic period, or if I was just that young that I don't know. And I'm like, why the hell am I thinking about this? Like, this is never.
You're like, this is not my mindset.
That never would have crossed my mind if I wasn't a parent. I don't think.
Yeah.
You know, like how traumatic that event could be. You know? Do you have anything like that where you're like crying watching something and you're just like, what the hell's going on with me? I'm losing my mind. Nothing?
I actually
Just
don't watch
me?
as much with having kids. I feel like there's definitely more things that I think about since having kids.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy
than
stuff.
Before.
All right. Well, you don't have any good stories, I guess. Like my whatever. His
Not
name
that
is now.
cried at.
I was not crying, but I was.
You were close.
Poor kid. He didn't have his mother. I was crying on the couch. Now, what else do you have going on? We've got. You got any other things that comes up often at work?
In terms, I mean,
Anything? What are you seeing
sleep,
a lot of?
Sleep's another big one.
With you or with other
just
people?
in general.
People aren't sleeping.
Even
They're not being
kids, that's the
hydrated.
thing. Like people don't pay attention to like kids sleeping.
Why We Sleep is a good book. Have you read it at all? Matthew Walker. It's pretty good.
Sounds like a good one.
I mean, they just cut back like this one school. I think it was in Iowa. Cut back on teenage accidents by like 60% by bumping the start time back 2 hours for school.
That's crazy.
Yeah, stuff like that. Then you have all the other stuff with just lack of sleep. Yeah, kids are like up late. I don't know why. I'm like, what do you do? Like,
I know,
what are you
they're
doing
on their
at 11 at
screens, on
night?
their phones.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Then they end up getting beat up. Not physically. Like their bodies get beat up because of that. I think, especially if they're active. Any other trends, common things, questions that come to you like, hey, do you have parents coming to you with questions at all about their kids? Like, what
You
about,
mean like?
just in general, like with their like if I have people in there, it'll be like, hey, what do you think of this? And that's where the little leaguer shoulder thing came up. You know, is there stuff that you see from parents or from issues with kids that you work with? That's kind of a common thing that.
And I think the problem with parents is they want an easy fix, or they want to do all this big stuff when it just comes back to
Stuff that they don't want to do, maybe.
Right, like the sleep, like reinforcing bedtimes, or like making sure, that they're not pounding junk food all the time.
Sure.
Like making sure that like recovery, people just don't take recovery into effect.
Yeah.
Hydrating. Yeah, sugar.
What about you? You got any good books going on?
I just got David Goggins' second book that I haven't read yet.
To that.
Did you? Did you like it?
Yeah, his shtick is interesting.
I loved the first one.
Yeah. No, it's in that same light. He's
Yeah.
crazy. Almost died a few times. Doesn't seem to care. Just keeps going.
His first one was like my birthing mantra.
What was that?
It was just like
The name of the book, or just his?
no,
his attitude?
like the whole
He's crazy.
you can withstand more pain than
Well, we talked
you
about
think.
the stress. Like,
Right.
apparently, he, like a scalpel broke, cutting through cartilage because it was so dense. So from all the stress that he put on his body.
Which is good, yeah.
Yeah, it was, but it was interesting. It's just stuff like that. He's out of his mind. He's totally out of his mind. Dude, I saw a girl that I never gave out. It was a joke, but I was like, I had to help her, and I was like, I'm gonna give out awards. This one girl, I named her the Goggins Award because she, I don't know if this is gonna sound like child abuse maybe, but they're like, hey, can we do a playing competition? I'm like, yeah, sure. So we started. These two siblings are going head to head. This girl's like 8.
All right.
And it's like 8 minutes into this thing. And I'm seeing that she's like, has her head down and almost crying, kind of like in tears. I'm like, all right, this thing is over. She wanted to keep going just so she beat her brother.
I mean,
as an 8-year-old girl, and I was just like, holy smokes. So if I was going to give out the Goggins Award, that girl,
it would
that
go
girl
to
had
her.
the mindset. Yeah, I was like, Jesus.
She did.
Like that physical pain.
Yeah.
She did not care. She just wanted to win that bad. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Intriguing stuff. And where does that come from? Who knows? But some kids, I guess, maybe
you gotta keep it
nature
going.
nurture. There's probably a nature nurture thing to it, but
you gotta keep it going.
yeah, I imagine they will. You got any questions for me before we wrap this thing up? Maybe I shouldn't have asked.
What do you see a lot? You see kids? What are you working with here?
Yes, kind of in that age group where they're just starting to learn some stuff. So like maybe 9 to 11 primarily, and then we do middle school. A lot of middle school stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of high school girls too that kind of come through. That they're good to work with too. I mean, they don't seem to get the same treatment at their school that the male athletes get. So, you know, there'll be a strength coach appointed to the school, and they'll be frustrated because, you know, the boys, the football team or whatever is doing all the stuff that's going to make them a good athlete that, you know, the college strength and conditioning programs are going to ask of their girls. And instead they're like laying on their back, you know, pressing a plate instead of doing bench presses, stuff like that. It could be a convenience thing. It could be the coach doesn't want to coach these things, but like, you know, the girls need to train in a certain way, especially some of the higher level ones that do plan on playing in college and stuff. They're going to have to learn how to do a barbell snatch or a squat or a clean, you know, all of that, because one, it's good for them. And then two, it's going to be something. So, you know, that was a frustrating thing. So I will get some girls, middle school athletes that are learning. And plus, then those kids that like the parents are just like, my kid can't be at home. You know, he's gonna go crazy. So I'll do my camps for younger kids. I mean, 7 to, we just had one last week, and it was primarily like 8 to 10-year-olds, which is fine. We got like 10 kids out here, and they all have fun. It's, you know, we're jumping rope, we're trying to climb ropes, obstacle courses, like you probably saw. Sometimes we'll do like, hey, as a group, we're gonna do like, you know, 1,000 jump ropes and whatever. So then they all just kind of work together, and then they start yelling at each other.
It's like the
you figure out who's like a good team, like who's a team player and who's not. Like you just you figure that out quick. One kid's like laying on the ground over there, and the other kids are getting pissed at him. I'm like, hey, you got to talk to him. You know, like he's on your team.
You're like, I'm just counting.
I kind of let it play out.
There you go. See what happens.
It's kind of like that. I take that parenting approach to the gym. Like, let's see how these kids work this out. I mean, we obviously don't want anybody like yelling and punching and saying nasty things, but I like the human interaction.
They have to figure it out.
Play out. Yeah. What else? And I'll do some adult stuff in the morning.
Nice.
Which is cool.
Do you find that kids have a hard time developing the movement patterns that you're training them a lot? Like training up like the squats and the deadlifts, or do they catch on pretty quick? Some of it though I think is like that. Like their body's not able to like, it's like a mind-body thing. They just don't
like the natural reaction if you're gonna like do an RDL, like just to like slap over the bar. That takes some time. That one's always annoying to teach actually, but it's like getting a certain level of strength and stability. I think. I mean, we'll do. I have these like workout cards that, even with like the younger kids, not young like under 10, but like 10 or 11, we'll say actually. Like it's like, hey, you're gonna learn all of the. Basically, what we're doing is say they're gonna do a bench press, a clean. And I have these 15-pound bars, which are cool. You can load them up to 85 pounds.
Oh, nice.
So for those kids that even are like immature and immature physically, you know, that 12-year-old that still only weighs 60 pounds. No, but you can load it up, and they feel good about putting 2.5s on and whatever. So we can do that with the bench press, and they can bench in the same spot with like the older guys. And so we'll teach a bench, we'll teach a front squat, and we'll do a lot of cleans in the beginning. And then, you know, the day that they don't do a front squat, it's going to be like a goblet squat or a split squat. That's pretty much it. I don't do anything cool and exciting in terms of like what you would see on the internet with like stability balls and bouncy bands and all that crap. I just kind of use barbells and kettlebells and just do the basics.
Well, especially at that age they need.
I even do it with the older kids. I mean, we'll start doing some snatches and stuff, and we'll do some more like creative jumps. But it's not, I mean, they're going to do chin-ups, they're going to do pull-ups, they're going to bench, they're going to do explosive lifts, and they're going to squat. That's
all you need.
That's kind of it, yeah. And we have it set up in a way where they could come like 2 days in a row, and it's like they could put a day in between, and that's good because it's like each day's total body. But if they do come 2 days in a row, it's in a way that, you know, day one's not going to affect day two too much. So it'd be like you might snatch this day, and the next day would be a clean, you know, which, so it took some time, but I think we got some cards here that seem to work. People are getting stronger as long as they come. One problem I see, though, no, this is where I'm getting to, is that sports start, then the kids disappear, and then their fitness levels drop significantly during a sports season. That's one problem that that I see that I think could be corrected. And then when you get into the single sport overuse specialization thing, they're always in season. But they're never doing the physical training that would help them become a better soccer player or a baseball player, whatever. You know, they're putting the physical training aside. Then we talked about that window. You know, girls, it starts probably like a little earlier than boys in terms of their development and, you know, puberty and all that stuff. But they kind of, that window gets affected by it. And then you might get the 35-year-olds that are weak still or can't do this or that. So that's a battle we're fighting.
It is.
But
it's an uphill battle.
Yeah. Nobody listens. I'm just kidding. You have to keep fighting the fight, though, right?
You're right.
All right.
There's nothing else to do.
Not us, then who?
Right.
I think we're done here. What do you think?
I think we're good. I'm good.
Thanks for coming. All right.
Hey, thanks for having me.
See you, everybody.
See ya.
Is that cool?